We about to get gorgeous or gross with it, Bumblebee? No in between. Either way, welcome back, and I hope you're ready to adventure through the ups and the downs of the top 10 creepy facts you didn't know about famous artists. If you're here for modernity, look elsewhere, because this is all historics. Number 10 will be Charlie Chaplin's casting couch. Wah wah wah. Sorry to break the news, but Charlie Chaplin, the man whose face you know but movies you don't, pioneered this notorious and derogatory element of showbiz, which Charlie intended, at his History Collection's rights, as a way of powerful Hollywood figures extracting explicit favors from actresses during auditions. Charlie had a long history of aggressive behavior towards women, especially in his sketches. Things went from sinister to surreal and then back to sinister again, as actresses endured slapstick ordeal as well as emotional and physical torment behind the scenes, especially because Charlie had a penchant for seeking physical relationships with co-stars, even if they didn't want one with him. In fact, he ensured many women had to sleep with him even without their consent, and children even came of it, which he would consecutively ignore. His alarming interests eventually led him to straight up leaving the USA. After preying on multiple wives and women younger than him, Charlie settled with 18-year-old Una when he was 54. They have 8 children together and remain married until Charlie's death. Did this change anything about his bad behavior? No, he was horrible to her. He was horrible to his kids. He treated them as servants to his ego. And in the words of Marlon Brando, Chaplin was probably the most sadistic man I'd ever met. Next up is the poet and the painter Caravaggio, number 9. He was probably the world's most famous Baroque painters. His shadowy works reflecting what he felt was the nature of man, but also himself. Caravaggio had lived an extremely difficult life, and it built the man into a hell of an addict. Drinking, gambling, intercourse, and violence were all an appetite he didn't seem to be able to satiate, even once he killed somebody. Yeah, that's right, homie literally killed a dude. Ironically, what ended up with him in front of a judge was attack poems written against a rival artist, Baglione. However, Caravaggio's real physical victim was one Ranuccio Tosonani, who had apparently been cut on the groin, which in modern terms means Caravaggio cut the stalk, removed an appendage. Catch my drift? Why did he do this? Great question. We don't even know. Through savage details, it suggests a woman was involved, and art historian Andrew Graham Dixon, who speculates it was a typical type of retaliation should the attacker feel his beloved had been wronged. And that definitely backs this theory up. In other words, Tosonani likely shaded Caravaggio's girlfriend and wound up with a wince-inducing consequence. Well, at least for the men listening, have fun with that. Number 8 is a man of many titles, including Picasso, certified thief. Imagine you have the gall to steal from the Louvre. I'm definitely building up to confirming what you might already be piecing together here, but Pablo Picasso, the sculptor and playwright and painter, was part of an art robbery, and even worse, was on the beneficiary end of it. On August 21st of 1911, Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa is stolen from the Louvre alongside dozens of other art pieces. 8 days later, snitch Joseph Gary-Piet revealed to the Paris Journal that Picasso and his friends, avant-garde poet Apollinaire, were in possession of Iberian sculptures that were definitely the ones stolen from the Louvre. And if he had had those, what are the chances he had the Mona? Well, the story continues to unwind, and it turns out Piet himself had stolen the statues and sold them to Picasso, who then bought them despite the stamps on the bottom that read property of the Louvre Museum. This opened up a wide debate if he'd orchestrated this theft instead of just being an innocent artist caught in the middle, as Pablo himself painted it to be. Art pun. Picasso turned over the statues to the Paris Journal, but both he and Apollinaire were still questioned in court regarding the whereabouts of the Mona Lisa. However, no evidence could be found that tied them to the theft, and they were eventually released. In December 1913, to the relief of Picasso, the Mona Lisa turned up in Florence, Italy. It reveals that a Louvre employee named Venanzio stole it to try and return it to its native Italy. Get ready to gag at number 7, Michelangelo. Why? Because he reeked real bad. And no, not the Ninja Turtle who lived in the sewer and only consumed greasy 7-Eleven pizza, because that would make sense. No. Real painter Michelangelo refused to bathe. The painter of the Sistine Chapel was one of the lucky artists who actually became famous during his lifetime and stayed that way. However, despite his immense wealth, Michelangelo was pretty lackluster in the hygiene department. On top of his refusal to bathe, since he wanted to preserve his natural man musk, this dirty goblin refused to change clothes. Dude, if you're not gonna do one thing, at least least do the other. Even Louis XIV, the dude who had a John under his throne and bathed twice in his life, had perfumes made for him weekly and at least changed clothes. Michelangelo had no excuse. In fact, on his deathbed, it said his clothing had to be cut and then peeled off of him. I'm moving on. It's just no. Let's talk about the Lord of Dance for number 6. Russian ballet dancer Rudolf Nureyev, nicknamed the Lord of the Dance, is often regarded as one of the greatest ballet dancers to have ever lived. Rudolf defected from the Soviet Union to Paris in 1961, and this was the first defection of a Soviet artist during the Cold War, so it created a national sensation. He was the director of the Paris Opera Ballet from 1983 to 89, and its chief choreographer until October of 1992. But thanks to a lovely biography by Dame Beryl Gray, a ballerina who collaborated with Rudolf through the 70s, we know now this guy was a colossal ass. In her book, From the Love of Dance, she describes his black moods, tantrums, and truculent offensive behavior. She recalls one occasion where he was so angry he picked up his thermos flask and hurled it across the room. Another instance was before a performance of Romeo and Juliet, in which Rudolf attacked one of our leading ballerinas, Lillian Belliafour, and swore at her, kicked her up the backside so hard she left the stage with great pain. A doctor was called who, after examining her, said her coccyx had been damaged and was bent. She was in agony, and the doctor advised us that the injury might cause her to act unpredictably and temperamentally. Lillian, in a rage, reports Rudolf to the police, while Gray herself confronted Rudolf in the dressing room. Nureyev was not apologetic, she wrote. He began running down the company and saying Belliafour had displeased him. I said, that didn't give you the right to kick her. He answered, I'm the greatest dancer alive, I can do what I want. To which I unguardedly retorted, there are other great dancers too, Rudy. He was furious at this and menacingly picked up a knife, but was restrained by his Monsieur Luigi, who, upon hearing raised voices, someone threw open the door and I was hustled away, with Rudolf shouting, no more performances. He later calmed down, and Lillian was persuaded not to sue him. Back to writers, it's H.P. Lovecraft for number 5. One of the most popular writers of all time, Lovecraft has influenced everyone from Stephen King to Neil Gaiman, but while Dr. Seuss definitely made some offensive cartoons, to put it lightly, he's a veritable social activist compared to H.P. Lovecraft. According to The Atlantic, Lovecraft wrote thousands of letters in his lifetime, and if you ever work up the courage to sift through them, you'll see him praise killings as an ingenious way of dealing with African Americans. You'll come across the passage referring to Jews as swarthy and guttural-voiced aliens, and you'll see him refer to New York City's Chinatown as just, you know what, I don't even really want to repeat it. This is the type of language and derogatory views that make me sick, and this man is a monster. Plain and simple. As a result of his rampantly offensive views, the World Fantasy Convention decided in recent years to remodel their iconic award, which previously was based off of Lovecraft's likeness. After all, it's a pretty bad look when the guy who inspired your statuette would refer to some of your nominees as semi-human, and not in a cool epic fantasy way. It's back to painters with Moulin Rouge, baby, number 4. Most people know of Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec from Baz Luhrmann's 2001 fever dream of a movie, Moulin Rouge, part of the iconic Red Curtain trilogy. As portrayed by John Leguizamo, Toulouse-Lautrec was an impish lout seduced by the green fairy of absinthe, and this is absolutely 100% accurate to the real man. The real artist was eventually broken by his addiction. His paintings, watercolors, prints, and posters found admirers in Van Gogh and Bernard, among countless others. But it clearly wasn't enough for the man. Nothing seemed to dull the veritable ache that poured from inside. He eventually came to love absinthe so much that he created his own cocktail with it, and he had a hollow walking stick made so that he could fill it to the brim with absinthe to go. For those of you that don't know, absinthe can reach over 60% alcohol percentage, and that's nowadays when things are restrained. Alcoholism caught up with Toulouse around age 36 when he died from cirrhosis. A reminder at this moment that art is a subject heavily laden with the topic of addiction, and that it is a disease. Always reach out to others for help, because conquering the shame of addiction is the first step to conquering the addiction itself. We do recover. So, you know her name, and you probably know her secrets, but everyone loves Frida, so she's number 3. Frida Kahlo is most famous for her self-portraits, now considered a glamorous artist and a feminist bi icon. Her characteristic art can be found on everything from handbags to pillows, sneakers, anything. Despite her often being considered a symbol of strength for many women, her self-portraits often show her at her weakest and most vulnerable. Kahlo had a tragic early life. According to biography, she came down with polio at age 6, which withered her right leg and left her with a pronounced limp later in life, one that required she set her teenage years aside to recover from, leaving her isolated and friendless. Later, as a politically active teenager, she's critically injured in a horrific bus crash, in which she was impaled through her pelvis by one of the bus's iron handrails. These misfortunes left Kahlo unable to have children, and many of her self-portraits depict the artist in bed, surrounded by symbols of her chronic illness, but also the void of motherhood she could not fill. Academics such as Muso Dolores Olmedo argue that images of Kahlo's favorite animals serve as a melancholy purpose, representing the children she was never able to have. Frida is remembered as being so strong because she overcame this emotional battle and accepted the reality of infertility, but did so without disregarding her own pain or femininity, or how she sometimes felt robbed of womanhood. Instead, she tried to pass on this message to other women who bore the same loss. Frida stands as a testament that not being able to produce a child does not make you any less of a woman. The dark side of dance and painting can be explained by Degas and the Ballet, number 2. Although popular in Hilaire Germain Edgar Degas' era, ballet had suffered a demoralizing fate by the late 1800s, one of an unseemly cabaret. See, in Paris, working as a ballerina also meant being a working girl, and the city's grand opera house, the Palais Garnier, was designed with this in mind. A luxurious appointed room located behind the stage called Foyer de la Danse was a place where the dancers would warm up before performances, but it also served as a men's club where wealthy male subscribers to the opera could conduct business, socialize, and proposition ballerinas. The politics that played out in that Foyer de la Danse was a great interest to Degas. In fact, very few of his depictions are actually of the dance. Instead, the artist tends to hover behind the wings, backstage, in class, or at rehearsal. In works like Les Étoiles in 1878, he depicts a curtain call at the end of the performance with a curtsying dancer. Behind her, a man in elegant black tuxedo lurks in the wings, his face covered by a goldenrod curtain. Such sinister figures also appear in works like Dancers, Pink and Green, 1890. Degas endeavored to capture the reality of ballet that lurked behind the artifice of cool, carefully constructed choreography. Although the artist was known to reject advances from his models, his callousness manifested in other ways. To capture the physicality and discipline of the dancers, he demanded his models pose for hours at a time, enduring excruciating discomfort as they held their contorted poses. He wanted to capture his little monkey girls, as he called them, cracking their joints at the bar. "I have perhaps too often considered woman as an animal," he once told painter Pierre-Georges Jeannot in a moment of revealing honesty. And last but not least is number 1, how James Joyce loved his wife. James Joyce defined modernism. He experimented with language, symbolism, and style. In Ulysses of 1922, he established parallels with Homer's Odyssey. In Finnegan's Wake, 1939, he mixed reality with a dream world. And in Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, 1916, he described his own intellectual development as if it was happening to someone else. It was all revolutionarily new. Except when he wasn't challenging literary establishment with his novels, he was penning some of the truly nastiest filth I've ever laid on to his wife Nora. In 1975, Joyce's letters were released to the world in a book entitled The Selected Letters of James Joyce. It's out of print now, but you can still find some copies out there, and many of the letters live on in the interweb. Even though this is a quiet, shy guy who wouldn't even swear in public, turns out his lovely wife Nora, to quote, turned him into a beast. It apparently all started while he was in Dublin on business in 1909, and Nora started writing dirty letters to keep him away from working girls. I put this at the end of the video because I genuinely encourage you to take the time to look up the James Joyce love letters, as there is not a single way for me to censor their content for you. They are that intense without even being that explicit. To give you an idea, he talks about some smells, tastes, angles, and Nora, well, she didn't hold back either. James Joyce prefaced one of his letters, "Darling, don't be afraid of what I wrote," and that is a word of advice for now thousands who have read them, or intend to soon. Alrighty, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more from us, and until next time, which was the creepiest?